Hello and welcome to Reimagining Cyber, the podcast where we examine the people, technology and events reshaping cybersecurity. My name is Ben, and joining me, as per normal, is our very own cybersecurity expert, Tyler Moffitt. Tyler, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Ben. Glad to talk today.
Now, we've warned people about public Wi-Fi for years. Usually advice is to make sure you're connected to the legitimate network and not something an attacker created in the hotel lobby. But a newly documented campaign called CaptiveCrunch changes that scenario considerably. What happened?
Yeah, so this is a different one. It's glad to talk about because, we've always talked about, be careful when you're, traveling in the hotel Wi-Fi, use a VPN. But, this is not the traditional sort of evil twin Wi-Fi attack where somebody creates a network called hotel guest Wi-Fi and then you hop onto it not realizing it's the wrong one. So in this specific campaign, you could basically connect to the correct hotel Wi-Fi, right? The exact network listed at the front desk that they tell you to join, right? And the captive portal is basically going to look completely normal, just like the normal portal. The problem is that attackers basically have compromised the infrastructure operating that real network. So Relia Quest initially reported this attack and basically found that attackers were manipulating traffic through Wi-Fi gateways used by hotels and conference centers and whatever venues type stuff. And then Microsoft published a broader investigation and named the campaign CaptiveCrunch. And those of you for anywhere other than America, that's just a play on Captain Crunch, which is a sugar cereal that's sold here in the United States. But
you can't, what the listener can't see is me raising my eyebrows as in, I have no idea what you're talking about. So thanks.
Yeah. But anyway, they attribute it to Storm 2945, which is Midnight Blizzard, which is like an attack group campaign that they give names to. Specifically, this one is Russian state espionage, right? Like they have different names to them, and so this specific group is known as Nobelium. Anyway, Microsoft They've observed widespread but targeted manipulation of traffic across hospitality networks worldwide. So this is becoming a pattern. And they're using that position to redirect travelers to, obviously, credential theft, 365 account compromise, whatever they can possibly get or scrape through this type of attack. And so basically, the hotel Wi-Fi doesn't have to be fake. The Wi-Fi name doesn't have to be fake. And, the attacker can already be standing in the middle of the actual real connection.
Do we know how attackers initially compromise these networks then?
So not conclusively. Relia Quest basically assessed that the exposed management services and possibly weak administrative credentials or vulnerable gateway equipment could be involved, but I don't want to speak on something that I have not confirmed as like the universal initial access method, right? Microsoft, they said they also found similarities in the equipment and management systems used across several networks. And that usually tends to be like the specific type of hardware, like whether it be a firewall, sonic wall, like an adaptive ASA compliance. We've seen that with ransomware where they go after a specific type of equipment that hasn't been patched or has some exploit, and then they're able to hit everybody using it. And there usually happens to be a lot of overlap, right? But in this assessment, the activity, might not be limited to individual hotels being compromised one by one, right? A lot of times it could be shared services somewhere with portions of the captive portal ecosystem. I mean, you want to be careful with the distinction. Microsoft is not confirming or denying a supply chain attack, right? It's just saying that there's these commonalities suggest there may be something shared among these environments. And that usually happens in these types of attacks we've seen. So whatever the initial attack method is, the result is also ultimately the important part and what we're here to talk about, right? The attacker gains control over infrastructure that sits between hotel guests and the internet. And then that creates scale. And so instead of sending phishing emails and hoping somebody clicks, you can now manipulate the traffic belonging to the people who are already connected to a shared network.
Now, just before we started recording today, Tyler, I was telling you all about my wonderful family holiday. I haven't been back a bare 24 hours yet, but it would not have been people such as myself who would necessarily be the targets. We wouldn't be those who'd be especially valuable in that situation, would we?
I mean, you could, but no, you're not the target, if that makes sense. Obviously, they'll take what they can get, whatever they have access to. But
Charming.
business travel, these are opportunities, right? They're opportunists. Anything they can get, they'll take. But the target is business travelers, right? And obviously, high-level executives would be creme de la creme, if that makes sense. And so, you think about who congregates at hotels and conference centers. You have people from government, finance, technology, healthcare, legal services, hundreds of other organizations, right? They're carrying corporate laptops. They have access to email, cloud applications, internal documents, you name it, right? And so they're not, individually selecting specific people at hotels. This is definitely a phishing pool that they're coming after, right? Of potential victims. But hotel Wi-Fi is often clunky. Some of these portals, they aren't even that great. I'm sure we've been to some Wi-Fi portals at conferences or hotels, and we're like, this one kind of sucks, right? The browsers behave strangely, or maybe don't give you internet for a little while, and you have to try it again or do it again and click agree again. And VPN connections might not work that well or take longer than expected. And so a lot of people are accustomed to running into sort of some amount of issues or troubleshooting, to where if they're, they allow a little bit of clunkiness or something feeling a little bit broken to go, I'm on hotel Wi-Fi, which basically makes, the environment to where the attacker's input and story believable in how they're doing this.
Let's break down the technical part then. One of the main techniques is DNS manipulation. What does that mean for the person connected to the network?
So, yeah, DNS, domain name systems, is essentially like the system your computer uses to find websites and online services, right? You enter a name like Microsoft.com or Google.com, and your computer asks DNS for the numerical address that it should contact, right? It's like your computer asking for directions, right? How do I get to Microsoft? How do I get to Google, right? And under normal circumstances, DNS gives you the correct address. But if the attacker controls the network gateway, which is what you're connecting to in this portal to get internet access, they can now manipulate that conversation, and they can provide false directions. So if you ask Microsoft or for Google, and the attacker sends you for an infrastructure they control, the victim did not necessarily click a malicious email or mistype an address. They may have actually opened up their laptop and attempted to collect normally. But the network changed, what happened after that, what they clicked normally. And so they observed that the hacker controlled responses being returned for legitimate DNS requests. And those responses could direct users to like doppelganger domains or impersonation, Microsoft, Google services, whatever they wanted.
What then if someone manually changes their DNS settings to Google's 8.8.8.8? Would that bypass the hotel's compromised DNS?
Yeah, not even necessarily in this. I mean, type in 8.8.8.8 into your settings does not create like an armored tunnel to Google. Some people see it that way. Traditional DNS requests, they're commonly sent without encryption. So if the attacker controls that gateway between your device and Google, they may still be able to see the request, forge a response, or redirect it before it reaches the resolver you intended to use. So your computer may be addressing the request to Google, but the attacker controls the road it travels across. And so this is where encrypted DNS changes the equation, because it protects the request between your device and a trusted resolver. But even there, the configuration matters. If an encrypted DNS fails and the device quietly falls back to unencrypted DNS, the opportunity for manipulation still comes back.
ReliaQuest also saw attempted abuse of something called WPAD. What role does that play?
So WPAD stands for Web Proxy Auto Discovery. And it's a legitimate feature that allows a device to ask a network whether it should use a particular proxy server. And so the device joins the hotel network and effectively asks, is there a proxy I should send my traffic to? This is a perfectly normal thing that happens in hotel gateways and through these portals, right? But a compromised network might say, yeah, use this one, except the proxy is the bad one controlled by the attacker. And so ReliaQuest observed the attempted WPAD abuse in about 1/3 of the cases it examined. But it couldn't confirm if those attempts were successful. So we don't know for sure that's the primary technique, but it does show how many opportunities exist when the local infrastructure is compromised, right? Hostile, essentially. And the attacker is not relying on one fake login page. They're looking for different ways to influence how the device reaches the internet.
And once the victim is redirected, what happens then? Are the attackers just collecting Microsoft passwords?
Yeah, I mean, passwords, obviously, lowest hanging fruit, easy stuff to grab. Sure, it's part of the picture, right? But the campaign can go way beyond that. So Microsoft observed doppelganger domains impersonating its services in adversary in the middle phishing, which is pretty popular. That it basically allows attackers to capture authentication information and potentially steal authenticated sessions. So that's something we've seen very recently too. These OAuth sessions and these cookies and tokens. But it also includes device code phishing. So device code authentication is legitimate OAuth process. There's OAuth tokens I was just talking about. You can commonly see it with devices that cannot easily handle a normal login. A television might show you a code and tell you to enter it on Microsoft's real website to authorize that device. The attacker abuses that same workflow, right? The attacker starts an authentication request, generates a device code. The victim is then convinced to enter that code into a legitimate Microsoft page, and the victim, could be on the real Microsoft domain, and they could enter their real credentials, but they could, even complete the MFA correctly, but the code belongs to the session initiated to the hacker. So you're essentially giving in those authenticated sessions over to the attacker, and this is a big problem, right? Because depending on what you have access to, you've now opened the floodgates or the back door, essentially, into your corporate network. And so that's a big problem because you've just authenticated an attacker session in your entire corporate network.
Yeah, so MFA, it technically succeeds, but the attacker is still getting access.
Right, we talked about it before. Attackers aren't breaking in; they're logging in now, and so that's that's essentially how they get it. Right, MFA doesn't protect you when you successfully authenticate the attacker's session for them, and so that's an important evolution in identity attacks. Right, for years we taught people to check the domain and enable MFA. Both are still good advice, but neither completely solve this scenario. So the victim might be on a real Microsoft page completing a real Microsoft authentication process, but the deception is about whose session they're authorizing. And so Microsoft says this device code technique itself it's not fundamentally new. Midnight Blizzard, that attack group from Russia, has used similar device code phishing before, but what's new here is the integration with compromised captive portal infrastructure and traffic manipulation like at hotel Wi-Fi's. And so this makes the authentication request basically just feel way more legitimate.
And the campaign, it's not only stealing cloud access, it's also delivering that malware as well.
Absolutely. Anything they can possibly do. And then when you give them the sort of authenticated sessions into the backdoor network, we got a real big problem there. But obviously, attackers can now redirect victims to fake browser updates, Windows updates, driver repairs, all the generic, obvious stuff, right? Even click fix techniques. I think we've talked about click fix before, where they have that fake sort of technical problem, give the victim instructions to solve it. Like they pretend like it's a click here on Cloudflare, check that you're a human. And then you're supposed to like solve what's a fire hydrant or what's a crosswalk. Well, there are some out there that are fake. Again, watch out for them. That say, press Windows R to open up the run command. Press Control V to paste this command. And then you're basically just bypassing any security you have and using the run command through PowerShell to download and run, malware, essentially, usually stuff like Luma Stealer, which it's very popular. It's become popular over the past year or so. But, the technique itself, the hotel setting, this all helps. The traveler is just connected to an unfamiliar network, a browser or network error initially probably doesn't feel unusual. They want to get online quickly. And so they're happy to sort of do what they're asked to do to get internet, and the guard's down, right? The shields are sort of down a little, and this is what they are capitalizing on, right?
What malware then can ultimately land on the system?
So anything they want, to be honest, but what they've documented as far as the primary tools, Cornflake and CocoShell. So I know, right?
It's a breakfast cereal fiesta.
Yeah, we see these trends now. People are coming up with fun little names, and when they called this CaptiveCrunch, probably because they saw Cornflake and CocoShell were deployed, and they're like, we got to call it something for cereal.
Yeah.
But anyway, Cornflake, not the cereal, the malware. It's fully featured remote access Trojan. Okay, so you call those rats. And so when it runs, it can display a fake progress screen that looks like Windows Update, right? Windows security or browser update or network diagnostic utility, whatever, right? But the whole purpose is it's the malware is establishing persistence, right? From there, it can log keystrokes, capture the clipboard, take screenshots, steal browser credentials, collect files, monitor anything, and allow them access to the webcam or even remote command shell. I mean, these are really, really nasty, right? They also will collect information about the environment. What do you have as far as security or EDR products or, anything they possibly can as far as, RDP history. It's not a quick single purpose downloader. It has extensive surveillance and remote access capability. And that's the whole purpose behind it. So now moving on to CocoShell, that's more focused on stealing valuable authentication material. Right, so it's PowerShell-based info steal. Remember, I was telling you with the quick fix using they do it through PowerShell, but it basically executes in memory, targets browser cookies, safe passwords, Microsoft 365 refresh tokens, any of these OAuth tokens they can possibly get, and so the Cornflake gives persistent foothold, access to the computer, and CocoShell rapidly steals credentials and sessions that can provide access to all those cloud environments. And I think we mentioned this before, but just to illustrate the damage and impact of this, you have to realize that these OAuth tokens that you get, these session tokens that authenticate them, they persist and work even when you do like a password reset. All right. So that's definitely something that you want to make sure that you watch out for sure.
Let's start drawing things to a close then. What should organizations take away from this campaign?
Yeah, I suppose like increase the distrust even further for hotel, conference, and airport and guest networks in general, right? Just so untrusted. It doesn't mean I'm not saying you should ever use them. All right, sometimes you have to use them, right? It just means that when practical, if you can, use your cell phone hotspot, right? Or another private connection. And if you must use some shared Wi-Fi or portal, use an always-on full funnel VPN so traffic is encrypted before it crosses the local network. And if you can, protect the DNS traffic with encryption. We definitely have products that do that, but make sure the configuration does not silently fall back to plain text, right? And organizations should also disable WPAD if they don't need it. On the identity side, review whether device code authentication is required. Microsoft recommends basically blocking it wherever possible. If some users or systems genuinely need it, limit who can use it, right? Conditional access around it. And as general, with these OAuth and session tokens and whatever you're granting permissions for, have a dwell time and a time to live on these. These tokens and sessions should not live for beyond a day or a work shift. And some of these, that people have set up last weeks or longer. When they get stolen, they can be sold on the dark web. And this is really stuff you want to watch out for, right? And then you want to have endpoint visibility because CaptiveCrunch does not stop at traffic manipulation. Defenders should look for that click fix activity and suspicious PowerShell command line execution. You should watch out for that. Maybe even prevent it through group policy at some level if you can. I know that might be difficult for pushing updates. PowerShell is very useful, but depending on what your options at group policy, for most of your users, they shouldn't need it, right? And so finally, I guess one extremely clear rule: never install an update or troubleshooting utility offered by a captive portal or an unexpected web page. This is the social engineering part that users are going to have to be aware of, right? So that's very, very, very important. And never paste commands from a website into PowerShell. Like, that should be obvious, but click fix is becoming like one of the most popular social engineering techniques right now to get users to infect themselves. So yeah, watch out for that. And a legitimate hotel Wi-Fi isn't going to need you to execute a PowerShell script in your run dialog. Like, just don't do that.
So what is the larger lesson there? Is it simply that public Wi-Fi is just an absolute no-go? Stay clear. It's just too dangerous.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, to be honest. I mean, the lesson is that the network itself can no longer be treated as inherently trustworthy just because you recognize the name or, the hotel staff at check-in told you this is the one to connect to, right, from the front desk. Like, CaptiveCrunch combines several techniques already existed: DNS manipulation, captive portal abuse, device code phishing, click fix is the new big thing, and credential stealing malware. I mean, the evolution is how those pieces are essentially being combined and leveraged. And so if attackers compromise shared infrastructure that uses that position to make social engineering believable, sends the victim into a legitimate authentication workflow or fake update process, and then can steal your cloud access or control the endpoint, I mean, no single control really solves all of that. So it's definitely stuff to watch out for, right? The defense comes from layering these controls together and assuming that any shared network could be hostile. So, you can join the correct Wi-Fi and still be going through infrastructure the attacker controls. And that's really what makes CaptiveCrunch important, is that, the trust assumption the organizations ultimately need to rethink.
So the Wi-Fi network may be legitimate, the Microsoft page may be legitimate, and MFA may work exactly as designed, but if the underlying transaction has been manipulated, those familiar trust signals may not tell the entire story. Tyler, thank you so much for breaking it down.
Thanks for talking with me, Ben. I hope everybody is eating their breakfast cereals this morning.
Or indeed this afternoon or this evening, whatever time you're listening to Reimagining Cyber. Until next time, stay secure.